Hello. This week we are going to take a look at Chapter 13, Instructions, Procedures, and Manuals. We're going to examine definition of terms, the functions of instructions and procedures, the organization of procedures, sample procedures, usability, and manuals, the planning and execution. So first we'll take a look at definition of terms. The precise distinction between instructions and procedures is not always clear. Instructions are generally brief and focus on instruction steps. Procedures include instruction steps but are for longer, more complex tasks and always include introductions and time estimates. In a sense, procedures are to instructions what formal reports are to informal reports. So looking at functions of instructions and procedures, they enable users to complete tasks with which they are not familiar. They focus on the actions that the reader's hands and eyes must perform. They're strictly chronological. They provide notes, cautions, and warnings as necessary. They do not explain underlying concepts, principles, or ideas. They are tools to get the job done, or, arguably, use the reader as a tool or a robot to get the job done. So let's take a look at the structure of procedures. So if you think about any set of procedures you've ever read, there's typically a little introduction. How does the procedure fit into the larger context, and what's the benefit of performing the procedure? When or under what circumstances should the procedure be followed and by whom? What tools and materials will be required and how much time should it take? What notes, cautions, warnings, and danger alerts apply to the procedure as a whole? What naming and typographical conventions will be used in the procedure? So those are all covered right off the bat in the introduction phase. So anything like that, you need to tell the reader up front. Next, you get into the actual step-by-step instructions. So what specific action should the reader's hands perform and in what specific sequence? Along the way, you're going to let them know what notes, cautions, warnings, and danger alerts apply to each individual step. Finally, you have your conclusion and troubleshooting. So what quick test will let the user know that the procedure's been followed correctly? And if the user has made errors in the procedure, how can those problems be fixed? So your introductions to procedures. To prepare the reader to perform the procedure, you want to give them purpose, authorization, and schedule, safety measures that apply to the whole procedure, how the mechanism or process functions overall, typographical conventions, tools and materials, and time requirement. For your step-by-step instructions, again, you want to use the following rules to make the step-by-step instructions as clear as possible. Number all the steps. Begin every step with a verb in the imperative mood. So remember, imperative is a command. Step 17, attach the hose to the drain valve. We're not asking nicely, we're just telling. Begin with an adverb if it is important how the action is performed. So if you need to be a little cautious on step 23, we want to say carefully remove the detonator. Step 2, calmly and slowly back away from the bear. Include graphics wherever you can. Use locate steps for components that are difficult to find. Subdivide long instruction sets into several sections and provide clear, descriptive headings. And we've already covered headings, so you know why that's important. There are also if-then constructions. If-then constructions help users choose the correct course of actions or check for a required condition. Here's some examples. Shut the backflow valve. Step 8. Check the pressure readout on the gauge for the fire suppression tank. It should be between 30 and 35 psi. If the pressure is below 30 psi, A. Briefly press the fire retardant hose nozzle onto the tank valve to pump more retardant into the tank. B. Recheck the tank pressure. If the air pressure is above 35 psi, briefly pressure key into the air valve to let a bit of air escape. B. Recheck the tank pressure. 9. Open the backflow valve. So you have some if-then scenarios. Next, take a look at conclusions for procedures. So, first-time readers might wonder whether they performed the procedure correctly. And I'm sure you've been in this situation. You do this long, complicated process, and then you're just done, and you are like, well, did I do this right? Give them a quick check to reassure them. It can be something simple. All 3 status lights on the modem should be steady green. If readers can make common mistakes, give them a little troubleshooting guide. If one of the status lights is flashing amber, check that the modem's plugged in, check that this is working correctly. Moving on to notes, cautions, warnings. You want to place notes, cautions, warnings, and danger alerts immediately before the steps to which they apply. This is part of the strictly chronological approach to delivering information. Failure to provide adequate and correctly placed cautions, notes, and warnings could have liability implications. If the notes apply to the entire procedure, place them in the introduction. So let's take a look at an example of. So here you can see a note about leaving screws loose. And you can see that notes provide merely additional and helpful, but not critical information. They may be included in the actual instruction step. Notes, cautions, warnings, and danger tags should be formatted with increasing emphasis. Readers should be in no doubt as to the threat level. And depending on the hazards the reader is likely to encounter, only 3 or even 2 levels of notes may be necessary. So let's take a look at what some of these should look like. Note: 2 different size screws are provided. Be sure to use the 3/8 inch screw here. So this is something mild. You see, like, hey, little heads up, got a couple different kinds of screws here. Probably not going to hurt yourself. Exclamation point. Caution, do not use non-rechargeable batteries in this charging unit or the charging unit could be damaged. So this is a problem. Exclamation point denotes that. A gas mask is pretty serious. We've got completely bold letters, warning, put on safety goggles and a breathing mask before removing the battery caps. Make sure the workspace is well ventilated. I mean, it's pretty clear that you need to pay attention to this. A skull and crossbones. This denotes a serious issue. Danger. All caps. Bold. Extreme electrocution hazard. Do not attempt this step without verifying that proper lockout procedures have been followed. So every effort's being made to give the person following the procedure a heads up. Do not take this step lightly. So you want to put the same kind of emphasis in yours, in your instructions. So taking a look at an actual set of instructions, here we see some noise cancel function. You can pause and take a look at these if you'd like. Now moving on to usability. So it doesn't do you any good to write procedures if the person that you're writing them for can't follow them. The number one mistake of technical writers is assuming that the reader knows as much as the writer. So most of you in this class are brilliant, bright, great writers. And you could write perfectly wonderful instructions. I am positive of it. But if you give them to me and you haven't taken the time to consider the fact that I am not in your field, chances are I am not going to be able to do much of anything with your wonderful, fabulous instructions. I'm going to get them and I'm going to say, wow, these are great, but I don't even know what half of this stuff is. For example, flying a drone. Okay, I know what a drone is in theory, but there's probably a whole technical side to it that I can't even begin to grasp. So I would need instructions for that written for somebody who has literally never even as much as flown a model airplane or even really played with like remote controlled cars or anything of that nature. I know nothing about it. So, as we've talked about before, audience has to be forefront in your mind when you're writing things, especially for a technical document. You have to form that clear picture of your reader. Who is going to be the end user for this? Understand that they are reaching for your instructions precisely because they don't know what to do. So who are they? What's their technical know-how? Do they even have any technical know-how? What are their relevant skills? I mean, we've all seen those books, the instructions books that are for dummies. There's a reason that they're sold and they sold well. Mechanics or machinists tasked with the maintenance procedure will bring more skills to the task than the general population. You need to clearly analyze what tasks the readers will need to perform. Figure out what level of detail you need to provide for them. And then test for usability. Find someone like your target reader to perform the procedure. Find someone who has never performed the procedure before and has little knowledge of it. Don't help them. See how they do. Take notes where they get confused or stuck and clarify those parts. Then retest using different readers or users. Moving on to manuals. So, these bring together multiple procedures for a common purpose. A software manual brings together procedures for all the tasks the software can perform. A bike maintenance manual brings together procedures for maintaining all the systems of a bike. And planning and writing manuals, it's a task analysis. You have to figure out who will use the manual and what they will need or want to do. You have to group the tasks into a logical order. Most to least frequently performed procedure, most to least important procedure, chronological sequence, or some other kind of order, and that'll generally present itself based on your need. I have written a manual for a bank. It wasn't the most fun thing I've ever done, but it's still used today, and it's about 16 years old. Make sure that you write each procedure in a style and level of detail appropriate to the reader, and provide a thorough introduction to the manual. This will contain an overall description or definition of the mechanism or software. And here's a basic look at what that would look like. As always, if you have any questions, let me know. And please reach out. Have a great week.